What would you do if one day you laid your hand on something you knew without a doubt didn't come from Earth, a silent machine? No engines, no propellers, no fuel. And yet, it could vanish from sight in the blink of an eye and reappear somewhere else, as if space itself bent to let it through. That night, in the pitch black Nevada desert, Ethan Cole stood less than 3 feet away from it. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, a metallic silver surface that seemed to shift almost like living liquid. His hand trembled as he touched it, cold as steel yet far lighter than any material he had ever known. And deep inside he could feel a pull, a strange energy, as if the craft was drawing in the very space around it. Ethan wasn't a dreamer. He didn't believe in UFOs. He didn't believe in aliens. And he certainly never thought he'd one day be standing in front of the Nightbird, the name he gave to this sleek, teardrop-shaped craft. But in that moment he understood everything he thought he knew about science, about the universe, had just been shattered. Just a few weeks earlier, Ethan's life had been completely ordinary. He was an applied physics engineer who had worked on military energy projects. He'd gone through intense security screenings, signed stacks of classified documents, and then been taken to a place that doesn't appear on any public map. Site Orion, the internal code name for a facility built deep into the mountains more than 20 miles from Groom Lake. From the outside, it was nothing but a barren stretch of rock. But when the camouflage doors slid open, an entirely different world revealed itself: cold white lights, gleaming metal floors, and in each massive hangar machines no human had ever built. 9 of them. Each one different. Each one looking as if it came from a completely separate civilization. But the Nightbird, the craft Ethan had been assigned to study, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside there were no buttons, no screens, no wiring, just flawless curves and a single energy column at the center. The lead technician told him, "Don't think of it as an engine. Think of it as something that bends reality itself." And then Ethan saw it fly. No noise. The air didn't tremble like it does with a jet taking off. Only a deep, resonant vibration, like a drumbeat inside his chest. The craft tipped forward on its belly and vanished in a curve of light. When it reappeared, it was miles away, less than a second later. Ethan knew that if he spoke a word of this, his career would be over. But the curiosity and the sense of injustice at seeing such technology buried away consumed him. And when the black SUVs started parking near his house, when the strange phone calls came with nothing but silence on the other end, Ethan realized they knew exactly what he was thinking. The story you're about to hear isn't just about an engineer and a mysterious craft. It's about how an ordinary American dared to cross the line of silence to tell the world something the government never wanted you to believe. And if he's telling the truth, then tonight, when you look up at the sky, there just might be something looking right back at you. The massive steel doors slid open with almost no sound, just a faint hiss, like steam escaping from a pipe sealed for centuries. Cold white light spilled out from within, swallowing the silhouettes of Ethan and the escort leading him inside. The air was noticeably cooler, and so clean it felt like the absence of any scent at all. The escort, a gray-haired man with eyes like cold steel, spoke only once: "Don't touch anything unless you're told to." Ethan nodded, but his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He stepped forward, and at once his sense of space and time seemed altered. The interior opened up like an aircraft hangar, yet it was different in ways he couldn't quite put into words. The arched ceiling soared above him, and the walls and floor were made of a muted metal that reflected the light softly, never harshly. Everything was perfectly proportioned, no scratches, no dust, no signs of human wear. And there at the center, resting in the white glow, like a creature asleep, was the Nightbird. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Not a plane. Not a spacecraft as humans imagined one. Its form was smooth, with no angles, no seams. The black-silver surface was so polished it mirrored the room's curves, but not like a mirror, more like the distorted shimmer of water in motion. The craft was about 30 feet long, 10 feet tall at its highest point, shaped like a perfect teardrop. The rear tapered to a fine point, the nose slightly wider, giving it the presence of something alive, coiled and ready to spring. What left Ethan speechless wasn't just the shape. It was the fact that it wasn't touching the floor. The Nightbird hovered a few inches above the ground. No cables, no supports. Just there, silent, motionless, yet radiating a presence so strong he felt like he'd wandered into a predator's territory and was being watched. He took a step closer. The air seemed thicker, heavier. Not from heat, but as if gravity itself was different here. In the quiet he caught a sound, faint and deep, more a vibration than a noise resonating through his bones. The escort motioned for him to stop. "Stay there," he said. "Take a good look. This will be your only job for the next few days." Ethan nodded, eyes locked on the craft. He studied every detail, no doors, no windows, no markings or insignia of any kind. On its surface he could just make out fine lines so faint they were visible only when the light hit at the right angle, as if they were part of its very structure, not paint or decoration. Underneath the hull he saw 3 small spheres, each about 20 inches across, arranged in a perfect triangle. Each was connected to the body by a short support. They weren't glowing yet. He had the eerie impression they were awake, that with a single signal they would come to life. "What are those?" he asked. "Gravity amplifiers," the escort replied. "You don't need to know how they work yet. Your job is to observe. Record everything." Ethan pulled out his notebook, but his hands were shaking so badly his writing wavered across the page. Not from fear, at least not entirely, but from the realization that this wasn't just a machine. This was proof of a truth he'd never dared to believe: humans were not the only ones who built technology. After about half an hour, another technician approached, clad in a gray protective suit. Without a word, he placed his hand on a control panel several yards away. The Nightbird trembled ever so slightly. A soft blue light bloomed around the 3 spheres beneath it. Ethan felt the pressure in the room shift. His ears popped. Every hair on his arms stood on end. The craft lifted higher, about a foot off the ground, and slowly rotated like a bird angling its wing to catch the wind. And then it went still. No sound. No exhaust. No scent of fuel. Just absolute silence, so deep Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. That moment carved itself into his memory. No textbook could have prepared him for it. No classroom could have explained how an object could defy every known law of physics and exist right in front of him. When the Nightbird lowered and the glow around the spheres faded, Ethan stepped back. The escort studied him, unreadable. "You've just seen something the rest of the world will never believe," he said. "And your job is to make sure they never know." Ethan closed his notebook, but he understood keeping quiet would be the hardest task of all. Because the image of the Nightbird was now etched into his mind, and it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Ethan had always believed he understood the limits of science. Rockets, jet engines, particle accelerators, everything operated within the boundaries of the principles he'd studied back in college: Newton's laws, dynamics, quantum mechanics. But what he was looking at inside the belly of the Nightbird tore those boundaries to pieces. There were no tangled bundles of wiring, no circuit boards, no fuel lines, like in any human-made aircraft. No control panels, no screens, no levers. Instead, it was a space so minimalist it was almost empty. Smooth, sweeping curves embraced every corner, no seams, no weld marks. At the center stood the power core, a gleaming silver sphere, no more than 16 inches across, resting on a pedestal fused seamlessly into the deck. But it wasn't the shape that made Ethan's skin crawl, it was the feeling of standing near it. The air around it seemed different, light bent strangely, and all sound seemed to drain away, leaving a heavy, unnatural silence. One of the senior engineers on the research team, a man named Dr. Howard Briggs, explained in a slow, measured voice, "Don't think of it as an engine. Think of it like a stone dropped into a pond. Only instead of ripples on the water, it creates ripples in space-time." Briggs told him the sphere drew its energy from element X-129, a material never found on Earth. In its stable form, X-129 didn't decay, didn't radiate heat, and when stimulated in just the right way, it released a form of gravitational energy modern physics couldn't yet explain. That energy was fed into translucent tube-like waveguides leading directly to the 3 gravity amplifiers mounted beneath the hull. Each amplifier was a small sphere set on a gimbal so it could pivot and redirect its output. In standard travel mode, only one amplifier activated, bending the space directly ahead of the craft. For instant relocation or sharp directional changes, 2 or even all 3 could fire simultaneously, warping space along multiple vectors, allowing the ship to fall into its destination without crossing the space in between. Ethan asked, "So it doesn't burn fuel?" Briggs gave a faint smile. "Its fuel doesn't burn. It bends reality." During one test Ethan was allowed to witness, the startup sequence was nearly silent. The central sphere began to glow with a soft bluish-white light like moonlight rippling over a still pond. The 3 amplifiers started to rotate slowly, and that light spread outward, wrapping the craft in a faint, shimmering halo. Ethan felt the pressure in the room change. His ears popped. A strange sensation washed through him, like his body had just lost all weight, then regained it in an instant. The surface of the Nightbird no longer reflected normally. Instead, the surroundings warped and stretched as if he were looking through a massive lens. Then came a deep, resonant boom. The craft lifted, hovering about 3 feet off the deck. It tipped forward belly first, and in the next instant, it was gone. No roar, no exhaust plume, no shockwave. Just an empty space where it had been, as if it had never existed. Less than a second later, on the control room monitors, Ethan saw the Nightbird reappear miles away, suspended in midair before descending onto an auxiliary landing pad. Briggs turned to him. "You just watched it fall through space. We call it a space fall. There's no such thing as speed here. Distance gets bent. There's only point A and point B." Ethan stepped back, his head spinning. If this technology was real, and it was right in front of him, then everything about transportation, space travel, even humanity's understanding of physics would have to be rewritten. No more jets. No more rockets burning tons of fuel to escape orbit. A trip to Mars could take minutes. But then came the darker realization: in the wrong hands, this could turn any nation or any group into an unstoppable power. And maybe that's why it had been buried so deep. As the test ended, the glow faded, and the Nightbird returned to its silent hover over the pad. Ethan stood there for a long time, unable to take his eyes off it. He didn't know if he'd just witnessed humanity's greatest leap forward, or a secret that could bury its future forever. One thought flickered in his mind: if the world knew, everything would change. But do I have the courage to tell them? From the very first day Ethan set foot inside Site Orion, he knew this wasn't going to be a normal job. Not just because of what he'd seen with his own eyes, but because of the rules of silence that hung over everything within its walls. Bright, red warning signs were mounted at every entrance and exit, each one screaming in bold capital letters: SAYONEWRONGWORDLOSE, YUAURLIFA. Below that, in smaller print, any disclosure of information will be prosecuted under national security regulations. Every morning before anyone could enter the work area, engineers, scientists, even maintenance crews, they had to pass through 3 layers of security. First scanning their ID badge and retina, then placing their hand into a strange device that measured bone length and structure, something Ethan had never seen before. Finally, a personal search: no cell phones, no private notebooks. Everything used inside had to be issued by the facility. Once inside, the work was compartmentalized to the extreme. The materials engineer knew nothing about the control systems. The team studying the gravity amplifiers was never allowed to touch the power core. Everyone held just one fragment of the puzzle, and no one could see the whole picture. It didn't take Ethan long to understand why. This kind of isolation wasn't just about keeping secrets, it was about controlling fear. The less you knew, the less you could betray. The atmosphere inside Site Orion was taut as a drawn bowstring. The long white corridors were so silent that footsteps echoed like a metronome. Cameras rotated slowly at each corner, their black lenses feeling as if they were staring directly into you. Armed guards stood at every doorway, eyes never leaving the people who passed by. Once during a short break, Ethan overheard two technicians whispering about last night's test flight. Minutes later, a team of black-clad security officers appeared and quietly escorted both men away. They never came back. Here, silence wasn't just a rule, it was a language. No one asked too many questions. No one wandered outside their lane. And when someone disappeared, the rest simply lowered their heads and went back to work. For Ethan, that silence began to feel like a weight. Every day he stood within reach of a technology most scientists could only dream about, yet every day he had to pretend he'd never seen it. At home, he couldn't tell his friends. He couldn't tell his family. Not even Claire, his wife, knew what he was really working on. At first, he played by the rules. But then the odd signs started to show. A black SUV parked at the corner near his house for days at a time. Strange phone calls. When he picked up, there was nothing but breathing or a faint click. One evening, returning home late, he found the garage door cracked open despite locking it before he'd left. When he mentioned it to a trusted coworker, the man only shook his head. Don't ask. Don't talk. And don't let them think you're worried. But how could he not be? Ethan began having nightmares, whispers in the dark, the pale blue glow of the Nightbird hands dragging him into the shadows. He'd wake in the middle of the night with his heart-racing shirt soaked in sweat. Day by day, it felt like he was living in two worlds. In the daylight, he was the friendly neighbor, the devoted husband, the professional engineer. In the other world, a world of shadows, he was a witness to something humanity wasn't ready to know. Between those worlds was a razor-thin line, and one wrong step could cost him everything. One Friday afternoon, as he was leaving Site Orion, a security officer stopped him. The man handed Ethan a sealed envelope. Inside was a copy of the non-disclosure agreement he'd signed. One section was highlighted in red: violation of clause 7 may result in prosecution or special security measures. The officer said nothing more, just locked eyes with Ethan and gave a single deliberate nod. It was part warning and part reminder: we're watching you. Ethan drove home in silence. Las Vegas was still blazing, with neon still alive with music and noise, but to him, it all felt different. Somewhere out there, a secret was locked away. And somewhere closer, unseen eyes were tracking his every move. That night, he sat alone in the garage, staring at his father's old metal toolbox. Inside was the notebook where he'd sketched every curve of the Nightbird, its gravity amplifiers, its central power core. His fingers rested on the worn cover, and for the first time, a thought flashed in his mind: if I disappear, the truth disappears with me. And that was the moment fear began to give way to something else: resolve. Fear at first was like a shadow that clung to Ethan everywhere he went. But as time passed, that shadow began to change, becoming something heavier, pressing against his chest, forcing him to act. He had stayed silent. He had followed every clause in the non-disclosure agreement. He had played the role of an ordinary engineer. But every time he closed his eyes, the image of the Nightbird returned, hovering in midair, bathed in a faint blue glow, bending the very space around it. Ethan knew that if the world saw that technology, everything would change. And he also knew no one inside Site Orion had any intention of letting that happen. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan sat alone in his garage, the dim yellow light pooling over his workbench. In front of him lay a notebook, page after page filled with sketches and notes about the Nightbird, painstakingly committed to paper from memory. Every curve, every technical detail, every measurement had been drawn with care. He stared at it for a long time, then closed it. The phone on the bench buzzed. It was Lucas Grant, his closest friend from college, a freelance photojournalist who chased strange stories like a bloodhound. "Ethan, listen," Lucas said in a low voice. "I know you're into something you can't talk about. But if you need proof, I've got the gear. Infrared cameras, long lenses. Just tell me where to stand." Ethan was silent for a long moment. He knew that bringing someone else into this would double the risk. But this was his chance. If he could capture the Nightbird in flight, he'd have something undeniable. A few days later, he called Lucas back. Wednesday night. I'll take you somewhere I know it'll show up. That night, Ethan drove his old pickup out of Las Vegas, heading north into the Nevada desert. Beside him sat Lucas, and in the back seat, Maya Reed, a trusted electronics engineer. All three wore dark clothing, carrying backpacks with binoculars, infrared cameras, spare batteries, and water. What exactly are we doing? Ethan Maya asked. We're going to see something they don't want anyone to see, he replied, eyes fixed on the faint strip of road lit by the moon. They stopped on a dirt track a few miles from Papoose Valley, close to a secret test site where Ethan had seen strange lights on Wednesday nights before. The group climbed a small ridge with a clear view of the area. Lucas set up his tripod and mounted a super telephoto lens. Maya powered up the infrared camera. Ethan stood still, scanning the horizon. Time passed slowly. The desert wind cut cold and dry, whistling across the ridge. Lucas checked his watch. If anything's gonna happen, it's now. And then it appeared. A pale blue glow at first, no more than a pinprick floating a few 100 feet above the ground. It grew larger, sharper, the hazy outline of the Nightbird emerging. The same black-silver sheen, the same perfect teardrop shape. Silent. The air around it seemed to ripple and warp. Jesus, Lucas muttered, snapping frame after frame. Maya whispered, that is not like anything I've ever seen. The Nightbird hovered for several seconds, then tilted forward and vanished. A heartbeat later, it reappeared miles away, then vanished again, each move ignoring every known law of aerodynamics. Ethan's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. This was it, living proof. But the moment of triumph didn't last. From the distance came the sound of engines, not the Nightbirds, but vehicles. Headlights cut through the dark, sweeping toward them. Lucas froze. We've been made. A convoy of black SUVs tore across the dirt, tires grinding over the gravel. Blinding flashlights, flared voices, shouting, "Stay where you are, put the equipment down." Ethan signaled for Lucas and Maya to lower their gear, but it was too late. 4 men in black suits and dark sunglasses closed in, seizing every piece of equipment. One rifled through Ethan's backpack and pulled out his notebook. "Mr. Cole," a deep voice called from behind the wall of men, "you know this is a violation of national security. Do you want to explain why you're here?" Ethan stared into the opaque black lenses of the man's sunglasses. In that moment, he understood every step he took from here on out would determine whether he ever walked free again. But deep down, he knew he had already crossed the point of no return, and for Ethan, silence was no longer an option. The sweep of headlights cut across Ethan's face, stabbing into his eyes and forcing him to squint. The quiet desert night was ripped apart by the low growl of engines and the crunch of gravel under SUV tires. The cold, dry Nevada air suddenly felt heavier, thicker, like it was pressing in from all sides. Lucas and Maya stood frozen beside him, their hands trembling as 2 men in black approached, each step deliberate, calculated. They didn't need to shout. Their deep, controlled voices carried the kind of authority you didn't argue with. "Put the equipment down. Now." Lucas lowered his camera at once, his eyes still locked on the spot where the Nightbird had just vanished. Maya slowly detached the infrared camera from its tripod and set it on the ground as if surrendering something forbidden. Another agent stepped forward and yanked Ethan's notebook from the pocket of his jacket. Flipping through a few pages, he glanced at the detailed sketches of the Nightbird, then snapped it shut and tucked it under his arm. Without a word, he turned and started back toward the vehicles. Ethan took half a step forward, ready to protest, but a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder, forcing him still. Not a word. The man's voice was like ice. "You know exactly what you've just done." A tall figure approached, clearly the one in charge. His face was mostly swallowed by shadow, only the cold glint of his eyes and the hard lines of a man used to giving orders visible. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "would you care to explain why you're here at this exact time with this exact type of equipment?" Ethan drew in a breath, trying to keep his voice steady. I was just showing my friends the night sky. We haven't crossed any government property lines. We're standing here on public land. A faint smile touched the man's lips, though there was nothing warm about it. You think we care about property lines? You violated a clause you signed when you came to site Orion. You remember that clause, don't you? Ethan said nothing. He remembered it perfectly. Clause 7. Any act of observing, recording, or reproducing any activity, imagery, or information relating to the facility or its craft, even from outside the premises, constitutes a breach of national security. Lucas shot Ethan a worried glance. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding all contact. The commander gave a signal. Instantly, 2 agents closed in, patting all 3 of them down, stripping away phones, spare batteries, and every storage device they carried. Ethan heard the click as the memory card was removed from Lucas's camera. An agent slipped it into his jacket pocket and zipped it shut. Mr. Cole, you're coming with us. Ethan was escorted to the largest SUV. The door slammed, the engine roared to life, and the convoy rolled forward. Through the tinted glass, he caught one last glimpse of Lucas and Maya. They were still being held, but not in cuffs. He could only hope they'd be released. The ride lasted about 30 minutes. No one spoke. The air inside was thick. The only sounds, the hum of the A/C and the crunch of tires over dirt. Ethan sat rigid, eyes forward, determined not to let them see his nerves. When they finally stopped, the door swung open. He was led into a low, windowless concrete building with no signage. Inside, the hallways were narrow, washed in the pale, sickly glow of fluorescent lights. His footsteps echoed, each one dragging him deeper into a place that felt more like a bad dream. They brought him into a small room, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera fixed high on the wall. The commander entered, set Ethan's notebook down on the table, and took the seat opposite him. Mr. Cole, this is the last time I'm going to speak to you in a friendly manner. Keep this up and you won't just lose your job, you'll lose your freedom. You might even lose the thing you're trying so hard to protect. Ethan searched the man's eyes for any trace of humanity, but found only the cold precision of someone programmed to guard a secret at all costs. I understand, he said quietly. The commander stood, took the notebook back into his possession. Good. We'll keep this. And from now on, think very carefully about every step you take. They released him without paperwork, without a record, just an unspoken warning that he'd already stepped too close to the edge. When Ethan returned to his own truck at the original drop-off point, Lucas and Maya were waiting. No one asked a thing. They just climbed in, and the 3 of them drove back toward the city under the cold desert moon. But inside Ethan, something had shifted. They could take his equipment. They could take his notebook. But they couldn't take what he had seen, the blue glow, the hovering shape of the Nightbird, and the truth that this technology was real, locked away in the dark. And deep down, he knew sooner or later he was going to tell the world. After the dangerous encounter on the edge of Papoose Valley, Ethan thought he'd be left alone, at least for a while. But within days, he realized that was an illusion. Every morning when he stepped outside, there was a black SUV parked just a few dozen yards from his front door. Always the same one. Always the same driver, wearing sunglasses, never looking directly at him, but always within sight. At night, when the house was still, the landline would ring and ring. And when Ethan picked up, there was nothing. Just silence. Or a single dry click. Claire, his wife, was beginning to notice the change. She asked him more than once, "What's going on, Ethan? Why do you keep looking out the window, and why are you checking the locks every 15 minutes? Ethan would just shake his head. "It's nothing, honey." But they both knew it wasn't true. The pressure was like an invisible hand around his throat. The message was clear. We're here. We see you. And we can act whenever we want. One late night, Lucas came over. They sat in the garage with the door shut, the dim glow of a work lamp casting shadows across scattered metal parts and tools. "You can't stay quiet forever," Lucas said, his voice low but firm. "What we saw in the desert, the world needs to know. If you wait too long, they'll erase every trace of it." Ethan didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on a new sketchbook, his recreated drawings of the Nightbird rebuilt entirely from memory after the original had been confiscated. Lucas was right. Physical evidence could be taken away. Memories couldn't. The problem was speaking out meant signing his own sentence. Once he went public, there would be no going back. And each passing day, the circle around him felt tighter. One day soon it would snap shut. The decision came on a Monday night. Ethan was watching the local news when a familiar face appeared. Jack Morley, a veteran investigative journalist at Las Vegas 8 News, famous for chasing the stories other reporters avoided. Ethan remembered Jack's exposés on police corruption, on shady defense contracts. If anyone could tell this story without turning it into tabloid fodder, it was Jack Morley. The next morning, Ethan found a way to reach out. Calling was out of the question. His phone line was almost certainly tapped. Instead, he sent an unmarked envelope to the station with only one line inside. If you want to know what's being hidden at Papoose Valley, meet me in the basement parking garage of the Orion Hotel Thursday night, 11 p.m. Come alone. That night, Ethan arrived early, parking in a shadowed corner. He wasn't sure Jack would come, or if he did, whether he'd bring someone else. But right on the hour, a silver sedan rolled in, stopping a few yards away. Jack stepped out wearing a leather jacket, his eyes sweeping the garage before walking toward Ethan. "You the one who sent the envelope?" Jack asked, voice cautious but curious. Yeah. My name's Ethan Cole," he said. "I used to work at Site Orion, and I know what's happening there." Jack's expression stayed skeptical at first, but as Ethan began describing the Nightbird, the gravity amplifier's element X-129, and the late-night flight tests, the journalist's eyes widened. Ethan told him about the stakeout, the confrontation with agents, and the quiet threats that followed. Jack sat in silence for a long moment, then said, "If you're willing to go on record, we'll shoot the interview. We can blur your face, change your voice if we have to. But this story needs to be told now before it's too late." Ethan took a deep breath. "No, I'm not hiding. If I've come this far, I'm going all the way. They need to know who I am. They need to look me in the eye when I tell the truth." 2 weeks later, the interview was filmed in a darkened room, a single overhead light casting shadows across Ethan's face. Jack asked the questions. Ethan answered slowly, deliberately. He recounted everything from the first moment he saw the Nightbird to the technology that bent space itself to the fear that had been a constant companion ever since. When the segment aired, it detonated. Jack's phone rang non-stop. His inbox flooded with messages, praise, threats, offers, warnings. Ethan's own phone lit up with hundreds of messages from strangers. Some called him a hero. Others, a liar. But the important thing was the story was out of the shadows. And Ethan knew there was no going back. The interview with Jack Morley had barely aired when Ethan Cole's name exploded first across the city, and within days across the entire country. What began as a segment on a local news channel was quickly clipped, uploaded, and shared online. His words, especially the moment he described a teardrop-shaped craft hovering, bending space itself, were replayed millions of times. UFO channels, conspiracy podcasts, and tech mystery forums seized on the interview as headline material. Public reaction split into 3 distinct camps. Those who had long believed in UFOs hailed Ethan as a hero, a brave whistleblower, the latest in a long line of witnesses risking everything to tell the truth. Reddit threads, Facebook groups, even in-person meetups lit up with chatter piecing together his testimony with old sightings and declassified reports. The skeptics came out swinging. To them, Ethan was either chasing fame or worse, part of a government disinformation op. Some scientists took to op-eds dismissing gravity-bending technology as impossible under the known laws of physics. And then there was the silent middle, the watchers. They didn't fully believe him, but they didn't dismiss him either. His account was simply too detailed to ignore. But public reaction was only half the story. The other half, and by far the more dangerous one, came from the people Ethan still referred to only as them. 3 days after the broadcast, he started noticing open surveillance. 2 men in black suits sat at a cafe near his home, never ordering, never speaking, just watching the door. when he left a black SUV, tailed him all the way back. One evening, Claire told him someone had knocked on the door while he was out. When she answered, no one was there, but on the doormat sat a plain white envelope. Inside was a single photograph: Ethan and Claire dining at a restaurant 2 weeks earlier. No message. No markings. The meaning was clear: we know where you are. We see you. Lucas and Maya were drawn into the dragnet too. Lucas came home one night to find his apartment rifled through, drawers open, but nothing missing. Maya noticed an unfamiliar car following her from work to her driveway. Ethan called Jack to ask if the station was facing heat. Jack's answer was terse: yeah, but we're holding the line. You need to be careful. They're not gonna let this slide. The pressure built by the day. Anonymous calls came more often, sometimes just a long, steady breath, sometimes a flat 2-word order: stop. Or worse, disappear. Once, while Ethan was driving the highway, a large pickup swerved hard into his lane, forcing him toward the guardrail. The driver, baseball cap, sunglasses, glanced at him just once before speeding off. Ironically, the more they tried to silence him, the more attention the story got. National outlets began circling. Major papers dug into Ethan's work history, cross-referencing his claims with satellite imagery of Papoose Valley. An independent crew even rented a helicopter to film hazy, anomalous structures along the ridge. The hunt wasn't just from the press. UFO enthusiasts began trying to track him down for interviews, videos, and conference appearances. Some offered money, others promised protection. Ethan turned down almost all of them. He refused to let the story turn into a sideshow. But the pressure wasn't only from the doubters. The believers wanted more details, more proof, a path to get closer to the Nightbird. Ethan knew every step toward that line was a step into deadly territory. One night, a text came in from an unknown number: we know you still have the duplicate notes. If we find them before you hand them over, there'll be no second chance. His hand tightened around the phone. The duplicate was the sketchbook hidden deep in a false compartment in his garage, the one with his memory-mapped diagrams of the Nightbird, the placement of its gravity amplifiers, and the specs he'd burned into his mind. Ethan understood something in that moment. This was no longer just his story. It was a fight over the public's right to know, and a test of how long he could survive caught between two forces. One desperate to reveal the truth, the other sworn to bury it forever. And the hunt had only just begun. After weeks of anonymous calls, shadowing vehicles, and invisible warnings, Ethan began to feel he was nearing his breaking point. His story had spread far and wide, but what he lacked and what the public craved was physical evidence. Not testimony. Not sketches. Something tangible. The odds of getting that were almost zero. Every scrap of material, every device inside Site Orion was locked down behind layers of security. But on a bitterly cold December night, the opportunity appeared so abruptly, he almost didn't believe it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: I worked at Orion. I have something for you. Alone. 2 a.m. Abandoned gas station on Highway 95, 20 miles past Tonopah. Ethan read it over and over, his heartbeat climbing. It could be a trap, or the only real shot he'd ever get. After several tense minutes, he made his choice. He left home just before 1 a.m., driving his old pickup down back roads, avoiding streetlights whenever possible. The desert wind rattled the windows, and the night sky above was an ocean of black, dotted with a few cold stars. The gas station emerged from the dark like a ghost, its canopy tilted to one side, rusted pumps, frozen in time, a broken sign swaying in the wind. His headlights swept across the lot and caught a lone figure leaning against a silver-gray sedan coat, zipped high, knit cap pulled low. The man looked up as Ethan stepped out. Under the harsh beam of the headlights, his face was gaunt, eyes darting like someone who expected trouble. Cole, his voice was rough, low. That's me. And you are? Call me Daniel. I worked in materials testing. I heard your story, and I believe you. From inside his coat, Daniel pulled out a small bundle wrapped in black cloth and placed it in Ethan's hand. It was light, but instantly strange, cool, like metal, yet unnervingly smooth, almost unnatural. "This is a piece of the Nightbird's outer hull," Daniel said, voice dropping further. "I got it when they cut an ultra-thin sample for analysis. They don't know I kept it. This stuff can't be cut, can't be melted, doesn't react to any known acid or solvent." Ethan unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tiny triangle no more than 3 centimeters per side. Under the dim light, it shimmered with a pale silver-blue glow, faint but unmistakably from within. He turned it over. Seamless. No scratches. No imperfections. "Why give this to me?" Ethan asked. Daniel's bloodshot eyes locked onto his. "Because I know what they're going to do next. Once they decide you're a real threat, you'll vanish. And when that happens, who's left to keep the truth alive? You brought it into the light, now prove it's real." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel was already stepping back, climbing into his sedan. Before the engine started, he spoke one last time. "We don't have much time." Then he was gone, swallowed by the highway's darkness, leaving Ethan alone in the skeletal remains of the gas station, the freezing shard of alien metal resting in his palm. On the drive back, Ethan checked his mirrors constantly. No headlights trailing him. At least, none he could see. But the sensation of being watched was sharper than ever. When he reached home, he placed the fragment inside a small metal case, locked it, and hid it in a concealed compartment beneath the garage floor, a spot only he knew about. But he also understood keeping it too long was just as dangerous as showing it. The next day he called Jack Morley. Jack's voice was gravelly but alert as Ethan gave him the bare outline. "Ethan, if this is real, we need to verify it immediately," Jack said. "Independent lab cameras rolling the whole time. But you need to be ready once we go public. Everything is going to blow wide open." Ethan said nothing for a long moment, his hand resting on the locked case. He thought of Claire, of Lucas and Maya, of everyone who'd been pulled into this story. He thought of Daniel, who might have risked everything to get that piece out. And he knew this wasn't just the next step. This was the fuse. 2 weeks after receiving the alloy fragment from Daniel, Ethan still hadn't made it public. He and Jack Morley were quietly building a plan, verify the material through an independent lab film, every step, then release everything at once, so there'd be no time for interference. But on a bitter January night, something happened in Eureka County that would change everything. That day, the sky had been perfectly clear, not a single cloud in sight. As night fell, the temperature dropped close to freezing, and the small town settled into its usual stillness. Around 9 p.m., the first locals noticed a red glow low on the horizon. At first it looked like a late sunset that had lingered too long, but the shade was too deep, too saturated, and it was moving. Within minutes, the glow grew larger, stretching out into thin ribbons of crimson light that twisted and drifted like streams of fire. People stepped out into the streets, phones raised, capturing shaky footage. The first videos hit social media, drawing more and more residents outside. Ethan was in Las Vegas when the images flashed across a live news feed and he froze. That red light, he'd seen it before. Not in the sky, but reflecting off the hangar walls at Site Orion when the Nightbird was tested at full power. He immediately called Lucas. "You watching the news?" "Yeah." "Jesus, Ethan, it looks exactly like what you described." "You think it's the thing I don't think," Ethan said. "I know." In Eureka County, hundreds of witnesses stood in the cold, staring upward. Children cried in fear. Dogs barked and pulled at their leashes. A long-haul truck driver later reported that his entire cab vibrated when the red glow passed overhead like an invisible current running through the air. And then from the heart of the glow, a shape emerged, not fully visible, but a dark, distorted mass silhouetted against the burning red light. It moved slowly, almost hovering, before tilting at an odd angle and vanishing. Not fading, vanishing instantly, leaving only empty sky. Seconds later, the red light flared again, this time dozens of miles away, and the object reappeared, repeating the same motion. Multiple people captured the moment from different angles, their voices audible in the background, shouting in disbelief. The story exploded. National news outlets scrambled to air the footage. Some scientists suggested it might be a rare atmospheric phenomenon like an unusual aurora. But the close-up videos told a different story. There was structure shape, and most damning of all, a way of moving that defied every known law of aerodynamics. Ethan understood instantly. This was the turning point. If he revealed the alloy fragment now, it wouldn't just be the story of one man. It would be physical proof, tied directly to a phenomenon the entire country had just witnessed. Near midnight, Jack called. "Ethan, I've reviewed every frame. That's the Nightbird, or a variant of it. This is it. If we don't move now, they'll spin it, turn it into just weather." Ethan glanced at the locked metal case on his desk. He'd held on to it too long, and now the world was demanding to know what had happened over Eureka County. They made the decision that night. The fragment would be taken to a private lab in Reno, tested under continuous camera coverage with two of the country's top materials scientists present to make the results bulletproof. Jack would film it all and schedule the release within 72 hours. Ethan also knew that doing this would make him the biggest target he'd ever been. And from the moment that red glow ripped open the night sky, there was no going back. The next morning, as he pulled out of his driveway with the locked case beside him, he spotted a black SUV parked at the corner. This time, the driver didn't look away. Through the tinted glass, the man looked straight at Ethan and gave a small, deliberate nod as if to say, "We know what you're doing, and we'll be there." Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter and drove toward Reno. The sky above was calm blue and ordinary, but he knew that after last night, nothing was ordinary anymore. Not for him, and not for anyone who had looked up and wondered, "Are we truly alone?" Ethan's battered old pickup rumbled onto the road to Reno on a freezing morning. The first light of day stretched across the distant mountain ranges, but inside everything felt darker than it had ever been. On the passenger seat, a small metal case rattled softly with each bump, the faint clink like a constant reminder this was the point of no return. Jack Morley had arranged to meet him at a private lab tucked away in a quiet industrial park. The building had no signage, no public entry, only staff, and those invited were allowed past the front door. Inside, two of the nation's top materials experts were waiting, one a former NASA engineer, the other from an independent research institute. Neither of them knew exactly what they were about to examine, only that it was described as an unidentified alloy sample requiring verification. Ethan set the case on a steel table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the lock snapped open. The lid rose to reveal the triangular piece, silver, with a faint blue shimmer as if it was glowing from within. Even for scientists accustomed to rare exotic materials, there was a pause. One of them reached out, fingertips brushing it before glancing up at Ethan. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen." Testing began. A high-powered laser cutter was the first attempt. The red beam swept across the surface, but the alloy remained untouched. Next came the plasma furnace, temperatures exceeding 30 C. The heat rippled through the air, but when the piece was removed, it was as cool as when it went in. Ethan and Jack stood behind the protective glass, silent. Each failed attempt to alter the material pushed the room deeper into a mix of awe and unease. Finally, the NASA veteran shook his head. "If you're asking me whether this could be made with current human technology, my answer is flat out no. This is beyond our manufacturing capabilities." Jack filmed every second, every shift in expression. By the time testing ended, the scientists signed a preliminary report confirming the results were indisputable. The evidence was no longer just Ethan's word. It was something anyone could see, touch, and question for themselves. But Ethan knew the more people knew, the closer danger drew in. Leaving the lab, he noticed a black SUV parked at the far end of the lot. Tinted windows hid whoever was inside, but it wasn't there by chance. Jack noticed two leaning toward him. "We need to move fast. Once they figure out what we're about to do, we're out of time." They drove straight back to Las Vegas. In a small back room of the newsroom, Jack pieced together the final cut footage of the tests interlaced with Ethan's interview eyewitness accounts of the Red Sky event and blurred satellite images of Papoose Valley. Every frame was deliberate, every line placed to hold the audience's eyes. Ethan sat in the corner watching the edit. This wasn't just a video. It was a declaration. Once this aired, every door behind him would slam shut. No more anonymity. No more slipping out of sight. When Jack finally asked, "You ready?" Ethan looked into the camera lens, the one that would capture his last unfiltered words before everything changed, and nodded. "No truth deserves to be buried forever. If I disappear after this airs, at least people will know why." The broadcast was set for 8:00 p.m. sharp, both on television and online. But long before the hour arrived, Ethan could feel the storm building. By late afternoon, his phone buzzed with texts from unknown numbers. "Stop now. It's not too late. Think about your wife." He powered the phone off and sat in the living room quietly watching Claire make dinner. He didn't say a word, only tried to etch the moment into memory, afraid there might not be many more like it. At 7:59, Ethan, Jack, Lucas, and Maya sat together in front of the screen. The last minute felt like an hour, and then the video began. On screen, Ethan's face appeared tired but unshaken. His voice carried the viewer from his first days at Site Orion through the moment he first saw the Nightbird to the triangular alloy, now sitting on the lab's test bench. The red-streaked sky of Eureka County flashed between cuts of the test results, the story building like a circuit feeding into an inevitable explosion. Outside, the Las Vegas night blazed with neon. Somewhere out there, the people watching Ethan weren't just audience, they were already planning their next move. As the video ended, Ethan exhaled as if setting down a weight he'd carried too long. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. This was his first step into a place from which there was no return. And somewhere out there in the quiet of the night sky, the Nightbird might still be hovering, waiting for the right moment to show itself again. After the video aired, Ethan Cole's world was never the same. Within 24 hours, views had climbed into the millions, and social media exploded with clips, quotes, and heated debates. New hashtags were born overnight: Nightbird, Colefiles, Gravitycraft. Supporters hailed him as a hero who'd broken through the wall of silence. They sent letters of thanks, emails sharing their own stories, and a few even claimed to have worked on classified projects, offering to talk off the record. But plenty of others hurled insults, calling him a fraud, a government plant. Anonymous accounts began posting his home address, thinly veiled threats for anyone who understood the game. Jack Morley checked in with him almost hourly. National news networks wanted Ethan live on air. Top podcasts offered exclusive interviews. He turned most of them down. The more he appeared, the bigger the target on his back. But his silence didn't ease the pressure. 3 days after the video dropped, Claire found the back door of their house jimmied open. Nothing had been stolen, but on the kitchen table sat a single bullet standing upright with a folded piece of paper beside it. Inside, 2 words: "Stay silent." Ethan told Jack and Lucas, but didn't call the police. He knew there were forces far beyond the reach of any local department. Around the same time, Daniel, the man who'd slipped him the Nightbird alloy, vanished. His phone was disconnected, his apartment locked up tight. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him since before the video aired. The weight of that disappearance settled heavy in Ethan's chest. This wasn't just intimidation. People were being erased. And then something strange. Weeks passed and no one publicly refuted the video. No government agency spoke up. No debunking evidence surfaced. Just a suffocating silence, and in the UFO research world, silence is sometimes the loudest confirmation. On sleepless nights, Ethan would sit out back, staring into the black desert sky. Sometimes he thought he saw a faint light drifting slowly among the stars before vanishing. He couldn't tell if it was an illusion, a satellite, or the Nightbird watching him. Once around 2 a.m., heading into the garage for a bottle of water, he heard it, a deep, low vibration. Not quite an engine, but eerily similar to the hum he'd felt the first time he stood near the Nightbird's power core. It lasted only seconds before dying out. When he opened the garage door, the desert outside was still and silent. He told no one. Some things he felt were better left unspoken. Jack was the opposite. He kept digging, reaching out to anyone who'd ever worked at similar facilities. Each scrap of information reinforced Ethan's story: underground bases, hidden inside mountains, test flights. At the same time, every week reports mentioning materials not of this earth. But the deeper Jack went, the more resistance he met. Interview requests denied. Cameras mysteriously failing. Emails disappearing from his inbox. Once a truck nearly clipped him in a crosswalk. Lucas and Maya stayed close to Ethan, though the three rarely met in public. They all knew the truth: once you open the door to this hidden world, it never fully closes. Ethan slowed his life down, avoiding crowds. He spent hours in the garage working on small projects just to keep his hands and mind busy. But one question kept looping in his head: if the Nightbird ever appeared to the public again, would he still be alive to tell the next chapter? He knew the answer wasn't his to decide. One warm summer night, months after the video aired, Ethan sat out back again. The desert was quiet. The sky was crystal clear, the stars sharp and bright. Then, like an old familiar whisper, he saw a dim, greenish-blue light on the horizon. It hovered for a few seconds and vanished. No sound. No trace. Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. Could have been a satellite. Could have been a plane. Or maybe it was them reminding him the game wasn't over. He stood, stepped inside, and locked the door. In the dark, the small metal case, now empty, still sat in the corner of the garage, a relic of the battle he'd started. Outside, the desert night swallowed every sound. But for Ethan Cole, the echo in the darkness would never fade. It was there in every heartbeat, every glance at the stars, an unshakable reminder that some truths will always stay just out of reach until someone bold enough reaches for them again.